Good morning. My name is Barbara Fuller. As chair of the board, I welcome you to this February 15th, 2022 working session of the Washtenaw County Board of Road Commissioners. Our communications manager, Emily Kaiser, will describe how our meetings operate, how to access the agenda packet, and how people may participate remotely. Emily.
Thanks, Commissioner. There are multiple ways to make public comment during today's meeting, whether you're joining us in person or virtually. If you're here in person and would like to make public comment, please fill out the sign-in sheet now. If you're joining us virtually, we ask that you virtually raise your hand at the appropriate time in the agenda. If you are joining us virtually, the chat feature on this Zoom meeting is available only as technical support for users on their computer or smartphone. If you're experiencing technical issues with audio or video during the meeting, please submit a comment in the chat and I will help you troubleshoot. If you're a staff member experiencing issues, please contact the IT help desk for assistance. The audio and video of this meeting is being recorded. A link to the video recording will be posted to wcroads.org in the next day or two. There are printed copies of today's working session agenda on the table here, and it's also posted to wcroads.org. There's a link available in the chat if you're joining us from your computer or smartphone. Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you, Emily. I now call this meeting to order and ask Aaron to call the roll.
Chair Barb Fuller.
Present.
Vice Chair Rod Green.
Here.
Commissioner Doug Fuller.
Present.
Commissioner Gloria Yamas.
Here.
Commissioner Joanne McCullum.
Present.
Managing Director Cheryl Siddle.
Here.
Director of Engineering and County Highway Engineer Matt McDonald.
Present.
Director of Operations Jim Harmon.
Present.
And Director of Finance and IT Dan Ackerman.
Here.
Thank you, Aaron. Next item on our agenda is public participation. This is the time set aside on the agenda to receive comments from the public. This is not intended to be a period for dialogue. Each person will be allotted 3 minutes to address the board. Emily, do we have any hands raised? Or Emily will explain how people can be recognized and offer comments.
Thanks, Commissioner. So since this is a hybrid meeting with both in-person and virtual attendees, we will take turn between those attending in person and virtually. For virtual attendees, we ask that you virtually raise your hand now. If you're viewing the meeting on your computer, first make sure to click join audio. You can then raise your hand by clicking the participant or reaction button at the bottom of your screen and then the raise hand button. If you dialed into the meeting from your touch-tone phone, raise your hand by dialing *9. I will unmute virtual participants with raised hands one at a time. I'll announce your username or the last 4 digits of your phone number when it is your turn to speak. Please share your name and address before beginning your comments. For in-person attendees, we will start with those who signed up on the sign-in sheet as you walked in. If you didn't sign in, you are still welcome to make comment. I'll notify you when it's your turn. And Commissioner, at this time, we have nobody with a raised hand.
Thank you, Emily. We will move right along then to the next agenda item, which is a presentation on Federal Transportation Planning Washtenaw Area Transportation Study. I will hand it over to our Managing Director, Cheryl Siddle.
Good morning. As you well know, federal transportation dollars are a very important part of our budget. We are able to accomplish quite a bit of work utilizing those dollars every year. Primarily, those projects run through our engineering department, and as we've talked through in the past, whenever you're getting those federal dollars, there's a lot of strings that are attached to those very important federal dollars, and it's quite a complicated process to go through in order to secure those dollars, the whole federal transportation process. So we thought that it would be helpful to give an overview of that to the board. We gave kindly Ryan Buck, who is the director of WATS, the Washtenaw Area Transportation Study, has agreed to be with us today. We gave him 1 hour to cover an incredibly complicated process that I have taken classes that have been 3 days in length. So obviously this is going to be fast and furious and a very general overview. But we thought it would be helpful for the board to understand what it is that staff is going through. They have the experience to work with WATS very closely in order to secure these dollars, and also that we have a our representative, Commissioner Doug Fuller, does also sit on the Watts Policy Board. And so we work very closely with Watts. We are very grateful to Ryan and his staff. They certainly advocate very hard for our organization as well as all of Washtenaw County, and they are an invaluable resource for us. So with that, I'm more than happy to hand it over to Ryan and to Matt, who will be talking about federal transportation process.
Thanks, Cheryl. Right out of the gate, Ryan Buck, what does PTP stand for?
It's a great question. It's a professional transportation planner, and I can't remember if I was going to sort of speak to that in the presentation or not, but I think it's a great way to kick off, actually, because transportation planning, transportation funding is a very sort of niche subject. As Cheryl mentioned, we are the strings, we are the red tape, we are the things that make things difficult, but there's reason all these processes have been put in place in the past. And while the planning profession has always had a professional certification, that hasn't necessarily been the case with people who specialize in transportation planning. And so the Institute of Transportation Engineers a number of years ago came up with a certification for professional transportation planners. And I thought it was important to do that, both for myself personally, but to sort of emphasize the importance of this as a specialized field and one that's important for people to gain an appropriate amount of knowledge for. I can't see it here, but I've got my little certificate. It's not like a big placard or anything, but I was the first person in the state of Michigan to get certified as a professional transportation planner. So that was sort of a point of personal pride, which I'll, for the most part, try to stay away from for the rest of the presentation. Can everyone hear me? Okay, see the slides?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so the Washtenaw Area Transportation Study. We're going to be talking about Watts and federal funding. And thanks a lot to Matt and Emily as we began to put this presentation together. I ran through it once and they said, this is great, but you don't say what Watts is. And so if at any point during this presentation, there seems to be a huge detail that I'm leaving out, or I get sort of dragged down in that alphabet soup, like calling myself Ryan Buck PTP or something like that. If it's okay with Chair Fuller, please feel free to interrupt me and we can make sure that you don't have to wait till the end to have, if there's a pressing question. All right, so, oops, here we go. The first slide that was included is just sort of a list of resource documents. We're not going to go over these by themselves, but it's just a little bit about what we are, who the Washtenaw Area Transportation Study is, the long range plan, which is our guiding document, that vision that we've created with our local agencies and the public, that shows what we believe what we would like our transportation system to look like in the future. The TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, which I'll also talk about, sort of the way to implement that in the short term with funded improvements. And then just a host of other plans and documents that gives you a little more sense of the things that we do outside of those things that we must to ensure that local agencies receive funds to build projects with federal dollars. And I apologize, I did add in this slide. I think this was the only thing that I changed in the presentation, but I wanted to make sure that I really get down with, or really mention what Watts is, who we are, before I get into the minutia of some of this federal funding. We are a multi-jurisdictional agency responsible for transportation planning. And so we do that with SEMCOG, with our local agencies, with the Road Commission, the cities and villages, transit providers, essentially anyone who wants to be a member of this decision-making body. We bring people together in positions of authority and decision-making with the public. And we fulfill a process that allows local agencies to bring in federal dollars. And in the end, that is quite literally where the rubber meets the road. We are in the business of making sure funds flow from the federal government through the state, the region, Washtenaw County, into our local agencies, and making sure that things get constructed. And we do that based on the vision that we create together, which is the long-range plan. Okay. So a little bit about the history of the organization. Regional transportation planning really started on the heels of the beginning of the interstate highway system. In Michigan, real regional planning sort of started in sort of 1964, 1965. And it was at that time when people even locally began to talk about what that would look like in Washtenaw County and what that meant for the rest of the region as these regions were beginning to define themselves. And the federal government, which had lots of money that it was ready to provide to essentially create the interstate system and the system that fed into that, said, we don't want to be in the sole position of deciding where money is spent and what happens. We need to have locals be involved in this process. So they said, locals, if you're interested in getting some of this money to help us build out this system, you have to have some sort of transportation study to do it. And so in many ways, the first transportation studies was a necessity to create some sort of plan for all this surface transportation money to come in so that it could be spent. And I say surface transportation, I'll pause to clarify. We deal with all surface transportation modes, but really when it comes down to it, we're talking about funding for roads, bridges, transit, and in certain circumstances, bike facilities and pedestrian facilities. We largely, and for the most part, stay away from the railroads when possible, as well as aviation. There's the Federal Aviation Administration. There's not a lot of connection between our agencies. The higher you go in the federal government, ultimately they get wrapped in together with the U.S. Department of Transportation. But when you go back down to local side, we sort of deal with the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. And those are the ways that the funds flow down from us through the Highway Trust Fund so that we can construct projects locally. And so in 1974, local leaders had finally gone through the process of establishing a local transportation study. At that time, it was called the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti Area Transportation Study. And it was the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti area because that's the urban area. That was an area defined by the census that says where certain funds need to be spent. That has changed in recent years. We're not just looking at the urban area, we're looking at all of Washtenaw County, and there's different funding sources that have different requirements and different eligibilities based on whether or not you're in an urban area or a rural area. One small wonky detail I'll get into is the fact that funds that are designated for urban areas may be spent in a rural area, but it doesn't go the other way. So you can't take money that's designated specifically to go to a rural area and bring it into the urban area. And I credit my
Chair had a question, just had her hand up.
Chair Fuller?
Yes. Ryan, what does the U stand for in UX?
Urban. The Urban Area Transportation Study. And that's another sort of weird, and people will still sometimes refer, didn't you used to be called UATS, which was always strange because it was specific to that Ann Arbor Ypsilanti urban area. That's a census defined thing. And we still have that census defined Ann Arbor urbanized area. It's expanded some since 1974. But I do want to credit my predecessor, Terry Blackmore, for expanding the planning boundary to all of Washtenaw County. She felt it was incredibly important to bring in rural communities to the discussion. And when you're dealing with regional planning or regional transportation planning, I completely agree. I think it's been great to have rural representation on our decision-making body and have that be a part of the voice in creating that vision for the future of the transportation system.
So is there still a UX or not?
No, we changed the name to WATS in 2000. To the Washtenaw Area Transportation Study. So the urbanized area is a census defined thing. And federal law says that we must exist because of that urbanized area. But our planning boundary, based on our agreement with SEMCOG, which I'll talk about in just a moment, allows us to administer this federal transportation planning process across all of Washtenaw County, not just the urban area. And that has allowed it to be a much more fluid and I think beneficial situation for our local agencies and the public. You know, what comes to mind is the old, back when the road commission had the, maize and blue street signs. It was always easy for a member of the public to tell whether or not they were in a township or whether they're in the city. And, we wanted to get rid of some of those boundaries and not have people get too worried when it comes from on the public side, not get too worried about who owns the road. We want them to get familiar with the importance of transportation planning, how they can get involved. And so that's an important role for us, is engaging the public and making sure that they know who they can talk to. But metropolitan planning organizations, so those were the agencies that were defined early in federal law to administer this continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive 3C process. So it has to be ongoing. And when I talk about our long-range plan and our transportation improvement program, those are, I hate to use the term, but it's true, a living document. And I see there's a question. I pull it up here. Oh yeah, Commissioner McCollum.
Yes, I just wanted to know why, I know you said the urban fund can go to rural, but the rural you can't share the rural funds with urban. I was just wondering.
It's a good question, and I don't know where that started. I have my suspicions, but it's important to know that that wasn't a local decision. That was something that was made at the federal level, I believe. But that wasn't something that we defined. Our policy committee, which I'll get to in a minute, does have the ability to set policies on things like that because we're all working together. And if there's agreement on something, we can move forward with that as a policy when it comes to federal funds. But the decision to allow urban funds to go to rural areas and rural not to go to urban is not a local decision.
Thank you.
All right, so the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, SEMCOG, we have a memorandum of understanding with them that says we will together perform the transportation planning function for Washtenaw County, so along with them. And this is a very unique circumstance that we have in Washtenaw County that I will touch on a couple times because it's important. So we have our urban area and our planning boundary, which is the county. SEMCOG is the entire 7-county region, including the city of Detroit, and they often treat the city of Detroit as its own county. But what they've given with Watts is the ability for us in Washtenaw County and our policy committee and residents to make the decisions on what we're going to fund in terms of construction and what our local policies represent. And we feel that that's part of the regional process, but it allows us a little more autonomy, which has been great. And I will credit some of the early UATSers at the time for having the foresight to plan for that. There was a lot of nervousness, following new money coming in, new regional organizations being set together. There was a lot of nerves for people throughout the region about participating with the entire region. Oakland County, the city of Detroit, there were certainly nerves there. And leaders in Washtenaw County in the 60s and early 70s said, we want to be able to retain that decision-making at the local level. And in our office, I actually have it, and if I can get a scan of it, I'd be happy to share it to you. In 1974, that is when UATS at the time came to be. And it's a letter from the chair of the county board at the time, Marilyn Thayer, to the chair of the emerging Watts Policy Committee, or UATS Policy Committee, who is also Marilyn Thayer, saying we've received everything we need. You're officially now UATS. And just a shout out to our first director, who is Cecil Ersprung. Oops, I just lost my slides. Bear with me for just a moment. All right, so when I talk about Watts, as a staff member here, we help to implement what the policy committee says. The policy committee is made up of local agencies who essentially opt in, and by opting in, you do pay a small amount of dues. And so that is the road commissions, the cities and villages, many of the townships, the RIDE, University of Michigan, Eastern Michigan University. We have members from throughout the county. Not all of the townships are members individually, but many of them are. And so the policy committee is where those decisions are made on what projects ultimately receive federal funding. And if there's any particular eligibilities or policies that we want to attached to federal funds that flow through us. And then as it relates to our membership, our operating budget is 80% paid for by the federal government. And then the feds say we want locals to have some skin in the game, so they require a 20% local match. We come up with that local match by our members paying dues. And it's a tiered structure that it's a relatively small amount. The Road Commission, I believe, pays $13,000. Washtenaw County pays $20,000, and smaller agencies, townships who I think our threshold is 5,000, might be 10,000. Less than that, pay a flat fee of $1,000. That gets your voice at the table. That gets your agency a vote when it comes to important decisions when it comes to construction. And it's not just local agencies, construction projects either. I'm talking about MDOT. MDOT has to go through our process as well. All the federal projects that MDOT has, which is the large ones, they need to go through our process as well. So we approve it here at the policy committee before it goes on to the region, the state, and the feds. Our policy committee is advised by the technical committee. Excuse me. The policy committee is made up of elected and appointed officials from our local member agencies. The technical committee is made up of planning or engineering officials for our local agencies who wish to be represented on the technical committee. And there's a question from Commissioner Yamas.
So you're going so fast, so much information. I wanted to go back to where the decisions are made about where the federal funds for the roads getting fixed, right? And you said 80% is funded by the federal government and the rest of it, or is that 90%, 80%?
For the most part, federal funds are 80%, or for the most part, projects that use federal funds are 80% federal, 20% local. That's generally the split. The Road Commission will often have a little bit of extra local that allows that project to be more flexible and bring in more federal dollars if they become available. It's absolutely the best way of doing business if you're able to. What I was speaking to specifically was our operations, like our office, our administration, our salaries and benefits. Those are 80% paid for by the federal government and 20% by our local member agencies. Does that answer the question?
That does. So that I was wondering all, and you just answered that, not just the cost of the roads, but the administrative portion of that, right? The rest comes from the agency, the local road agencies, the Washtenaw County Road Commission. Right?
And often when it comes to construction projects, that's often, it could be state funds or any type of local funds. So that can sort of be blended as long as there's a non-federal match for that large federal share.
Okay.
And then sort of getting back to where the money goes, I want to highlight the federal aid committees. The federal aid committees, we have one for the urban area and the rural area, and that is where the agencies eligible to receive federal funds come together to make sure that we can deliver program. We have a finite amount of dollars that can and has to be spent each year. And so if we have $5 million a year in urban funds, we can't spend $4 million and say, give us another $1 million next year. We have to be down to the dollar to make sure it gets spent. And there's some creative financing that we do with that the feds allow, and moving projects and scaling them. I mentioned that slight overmatch where a local agency will have a little extra local dollars so that they can absorb more federal dollars if they become available. And that happens when we least expect it too. We'll have new targets. We'll suddenly have a couple $100,000 or even a couple $1 million that needs to be spent right then. And it's because we have built a lot of trust between our local members that we're able to do that. So the Federal Aid Committee is those implementing agencies that comes together to make sure that a program that has gone through our process, our application process, which I'll talk about, is something that can be delivered. Because when we're going to the public, we don't want to say, here's a list of projects that might happen. We want to be able to say, here's a list of projects that we believe gets us closer to our vision. Do you support this? We don't want to say, maybe these projects will happen. We want to have some sort of realistic expectation that it's all going to be constructed. And then I report directly to the policy committee and the technical committee. And then we have a small staff that is particularly small right now. We have been a staff of 4 since 2003. And as of this Friday, we're going to be down to a staff of 2. And so we're currently strained right now, but again, because of the people who remain here and because of the partnerships that we've made with our local agencies, we remain in great shape. All right, so just sort of who at the Road Commission do we interact with the most? Who is representing the Road Commission on our committees? For many years, Commissioner Doug Fuller has been our policy committee rep. And when he's not able to come, it has been the managing director. And so now that's Cheryl when Doug's not available. On our technical committee, Matt has been participating. And then Brent is there in his stead when he's not able to participate. And then when it comes to the federal aid committee, which is again that group that says, how much money do we have? What projects are we able to deliver? And do they meet our timelines and the costs? Matt McDonnell represents the Road Commission there. Relationship to other planning agencies. So Watts is a fantastic forum for elected officials at our policy committee meetings. And it's been unfortunate for the last couple of years that we haven't had quite the same level of camaraderie with in-person meetings, because we have built this flexible process and we've worked together to build that like truly a strong foundation of trust, which allows regionalism to succeed in Washtenaw County. But when we make those decisions, when our policy committee makes those decisions, our documents are wrapped into those at SEMCOG. As I mentioned earlier, we have an MOU with SEMCOG that says we will perform the required transportation planning responsibilities for Washtenaw County together with SEMCOG. Once things are approved at SEMCOG, they move up to the Michigan Department of Transportation. We have a strong relationship with them as well. And then the Federal Highway Administration ultimately approves things. Once things get to them and they are approved, we're able to move forward with securing funds and promising local agencies that they'll be paid for those projects. And I also wanted to mention the Michigan Transportation Planning Association. That is, the association of agencies like Watts within the state of Michigan. So anywhere there is an urban area with more than 50,000 people in that census-defined urban area, an agency or function such as Watts exists. We all get together to make sure that MDOT isn't telling us all different stories. And so we're sort of protecting local agencies through this transportation planning process. And I'll mention it again because I think it's so important. Because of that foundation of trust that we have all built together, we have co-created this well-functioning modern regional process, which is, I think, just a fantastic example of how people can work together with the constraints of regional government. And regional government is a challenge in Southeast Michigan. And we're very fortunate to be working with willing, active, and engaged partners like the Road Commission. So the functions of Watts, ultimately, we're talking about money and projects, making sure that the requirements are fulfilled so that federal dollars come to Washtenaw County and are spent with our local agencies. But we do provide a lot of community assistance. I'll talk about tactical urbanism. If I don't keep rambling on too long, we are there as a resource for our locals to navigate these confusing processes, these strings that Cheryl mentioned, the red tape, as I often refer to it as. Funds management. There are lots of different federal funds with different eligibilities, different places they can be spent, different timelines. I try to take that out of conversations like this because it's not helpful, but they exist. And my goal is for our staff to do all that so it doesn't get confusing to other people. And so the public doesn't have to worry about what funding source or who owns the road, but can more focus on their needs. And then speaking of the public, our challenge is that we often deal with visions And getting people to come and participate, maybe on an evening where we talk about sort of the future of transportation is a challenge. And then ultimately, when a project moves forward and say, hey, there's a project that's going to be receiving federal funds, what do you think? They've often heard of it by that point because of the local agencies, either the NEPA process or whatever, which is the National Environmental Policy Act process to engage the public and ensure that that the environmental impacts of a project are understood. Despite not being able to engage the public actively, have as much participation as we'd like, we try to make the information as accessible as possible and bring it to them wherever we can. So we still will, from time to time, take out an ad in a local paper if a local paper still exists. We've certainly relied on things like social media more when it comes to the pandemic in our meetings, but we want to engage the public and hear as many voices as we can and make sure that those voices are heard by our local agencies too. So we try to act as this place where people come together and ideas come together. I see there's a question by Commissioner McCollum.
Yes, Ryan, that's what I was gonna ask, is how you let the public know that you have something to present. And like in our area, we don't have a local paper, and we have a lot of people on social media and a lot of people not on social media. What are other ways that you let the public know that you have some information for them?
It's a great question, and I should not understate the importance of local agencies and their process, because for all these projects that we're dealing with, local agencies are already going through a process to engage the public. We've tried a number of things. We do have our sort of more traditional online communications, social media, newsletters, blog posts, our website, but we do go out in the community as well. We will we'll have public meetings. We often try to piggyback those on other meetings where people are already going to be present. The hope being that even if they're not aware, they still get exposed to it in some way or another. And over the last maybe 4 years, the new thing that we're trying is just pop-up meetings where we'll just go somewhere. We'll go to the library. We'll go to a coffee shop. We'll go there during the morning. We'll go there during the afternoon or evening and bring a couple boards with us and sort of stand there and it's almost like we're trying to sell something, asking people what their thoughts are on transportation. And that has been relatively successful. They're not always successful, but it gets more people actually participating who normally wouldn't. And so the public process is incredibly important for us. It's required, but it's something that we still struggle with actively engaging people.
Thank you.
And at the end of the slide, I have a quote from Carmen Palumbo, who was the director of transportation with SEMCOG for a long time. And he says, our job is to get projects out the door. And I put that in there to remind myself not to take ourselves too seriously. Planners can often get stuck in visions and sort of remove ourselves from reality. And so there are things that we advocate for, but we realize that the important thing is making sure that locals get the money to construct the projects for their constituency and residents. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the long-range transportation plan. And this is something that we're required to do, and it sets that 20-year plus vision of the transportation system of the future. We use it as a policy guide. And when I say that, I try to treat it more like a community master plan than just a list of projects or estimated funding revenues. We put in things that we hope will be able to guide our technical and policy committee and provide information to the public about where we believe we are going. But the plan, despite its sort of visionary nature, has a financially constrained list of projects. The specificity of those projects gets less and less as we move further out into that 20 or 25-year planning horizon. And so when you look at the first 4 or 5 years, it is project to the dollar, But then if you look out 25 years or 20 years in the future, you start seeing more general items like pavement preservation in the city of Ypsilanti. Or a large, we call them line items, something that we'll talk about, bus purchases for the ride, something like that. And I have a couple slides here that show the goals that we identified in the long range plan. These goals, for the most part, have been similar for as long as I have been with Watts. Commissioner McCollum, did you have a question?
Hey there, Ryan. What I was gonna ask about that, your 20-year planning, 2045, it reminded me of the master plan that Ypsilanti Township did, I think it was called 2040. I was wondering, do you tap into the various communities' master plans to work with?
I would say engaged. And so when communities are creating their master plan, we try to participate, we try to go to meetings, we review the plans and make sure that there is nothing that is out of line with the sort of vision that we're establishing with our long range plan. And so if it were the case where there's some sort of major transportation improvement that is listed in a community master plan that isn't listed in the long range plan, and there isn't a reason it shouldn't be listed in the long range plan, that would be something that I would want to correct. And that would be something that got past us. So the intent would be that major transportation improvements would be there. Another important component of that is anticipated growth in jobs and residents. And that is something that is incorporated to our travel demand model, which I'll hopefully talk just briefly about a little bit later.
Thank you.
So the goals that we identified as part of the 2045 plan are similar to what they've been in the past, but really wanted to make the information easy to digest without getting into the details. The details are all there if you go through the plan. The major change that we did with our goals this time around was the addition of equity. And then we used what the county was using at the time to help define that, because I know that equity can often be nebulous and people have different definitions for it. I'll talk briefly about that, but neither your race nor your zip code should determine your chances in life. With the county working on the opportunity index, we thought we had a great opportunity to begin to stretch its legs and test it and see what that meant for transportation improvements, not to dictate where transportation improvements go, because that's a decision of our policy committee, but to understand in areas that were defined as low or very low opportunity, just how much money is being spent there. That was something that our committee wanted to understand. And with the opportunity index, there are a number of indicators. Transportation is one of them. And for the most part now, especially with the new opportunity index, that is mostly about job access. In our plan, we talk about transportation, the history of transportation and decision-making and the detrimental effects of systemic racism. We know that our $5 or $10 million a year is not going to change that. And we don't fully understand how it will change the outcomes, but our policy committee has said it's important for us to understand what's being spent there and set a goal of increasing that over time. And so for now, that's what we're reporting. Every time we update the transportation improvement program, which I'll talk about in a minute, unless I go over, we look at how much is being spent in areas of low and very low opportunity. It was a great opportunity for us to work directly with the county. And it also helped us because before we started looking at the opportunity index, really the only required process that exists for us and other agencies is the environmental justice process. And that looks at whether or not there is a disproportionate negative impact of transportation investment in areas of high concentration of minorities or low income. But that was essentially, hey, you're not making it worse, right? And so the answer would be, we're not making it worse. And so I do believe that the the equity analysis allows us to begin answering those questions with more detailed data and get a better understanding if the investments we're making are making a positive impact in areas of low and very low opportunity, as opposed to just saying, are we not making things worse? And I hate to sort of blend our official policy with sort of how I interpret it, but it's important to know that while our goal is to increase investment, federal investment in areas of low and very low opportunity, that is not specific to a particular agency, to a particular area, other than those defined as that in the opportunity index. And there's no dollar amount that says if we're not spending 80% or $7 million a year in areas of low or very low opportunity, then we're missing our goal. Our policy committee has not said that. And there's a couple questions from Commissioners Green and McCollum.
Sure, Ryan. You've kind of answered it, but what kind of monitoring mechanism do you have to make sure that equity is actually being achieved and that zip codes aren't being neglected or discriminated against?
Yeah, it's a great question and one that we still struggle with, knowing that when it comes to the opportunity index, access to jobs is sort of the thing that is measured there. So we take it as just as basic level as you can, whether or not a project is having a direct benefit for an area of low or very low opportunity. And so we will look at a project and say, is this project within or along or adjacent to one of those areas? And if it is, we essentially total that dollar amount. And then we compare that to the dollar amounts of all the investments. And there's a couple nuances, because things like a transit investment, or a pavement preservation project that isn't yet defined exactly where it's going to be, can be hard to say whether or not there's going to be a direct benefit. But I would, if it would be okay, after this meeting, I can send an example of the transportation improvement program analysis that we do, just so you can actually see how we do it, because it's described much better in the memo than I could describe it right here. What we do, how we measure it, and sort of what that means in terms of investment.
So like if the zip code thinks that they're being ignored, what kind of?
And that's a really tricky point, because since we're dealing with things over time, a shift in a major project can completely change the way our opportunity analysis looks. So you could have MDOT come in with a $100 million project that happens to not be in a area of low or very low opportunity. And then it looks like as a county, we're not spending money in areas of low or very low opportunity. But the opposite can be true. MDOT could essentially be doing a highway widening or addition of a flex lane or auxiliary lane or something like that in an area of low opportunity. And it could look like all the money is being spent in areas of low or low opportunity. So it is not a foolproof system. And it's something that we try to look at each time. And that is the question that both us as staff and our policy committee are struggling with, trying to understand exactly what it means, because the opportunity index is relatively new. Our tracking of investment is still new. And I try to be careful to not assume that just because we're spending $1 million or $2 million more than we would have. So even though I think it's an important focus area, I think it's important to manage our expectations that the couple $1 million that we have for transportation improvements is not just going to, over the course of a couple of years, bring equity to the system. And so we know we're not the full solution, but we do believe we're a small part of it. And so when it comes to an individual zip code or community that feels like they're not getting enough, that is a very real feeling. And the hope is that we can build that something can be spent there in the future. So we are not at this point looking at individual zip codes or census tracts or anything like that and saying, is this census tract itself being given enough money? We're still looking at it collectively as sort of the area of low or very low opportunity. And we are being careful to not get agency specific with this or zip code specific, but stick to areas that are defined in the opportunity index as low or very low opportunity. I'm glad I see all the hands coming up. This is great.
Thank you.
Commissioner McCollum?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I was glad to see that, about the equity. I grew up in Detroit in the sixties, and I wish this had been in the forefront of designing expressways. There were at least 2 expressways, major expressways that went through middle class African-American neighborhoods, and took down the homes, the businesses, and there was just no thought in, about the community at all. So I'm glad that this is there, because I know that at least with this there, you would think about before putting something in, what effect it would have on the surrounding community. So I just want to say thank you for having that there.
And I think it's a great comment, and I think it sort of highlights this small but important change from, are we not making things worse, to are we trying to make things better? And again, there's nothing specific that says this has to be done in this specific area. That's not where our policy committee is at right now, but they are actively interested in better understanding the impacts that the money that we control has. Commissioner Yamas?
So as I'm trying to grasp that, it's an excellent idea. I was trying to think of an example that not recently, maybe a couple of years ago, where they were trying to example, Ann Arbor employs a lot of service jobs, and the people working those service jobs can't necessarily afford to live in Ann Arbor. So there was a transportation bill that was trying to go through that would bring people in from other zip codes that someone may live, somebody who's a waitress or a bus person wouldn't necessarily have the ability to live in Washtenaw County either, outside of Washtenaw County, inside Washtenaw County. Is that what you're talking about? That kind of keeps that in mind, that would help fund some of those transportation ideas?
I think that's an excellent example of some of the challenges that go with trying to measure the benefit. Ultimately, with the opportunity index, there's outcomes that are being looked at. But when it comes to transportation, it's that access. And so the availability of something like transit is critical. And that is a very binary yes or no thing that we can measure. But one of the things that we struggled with when we're trying to define the amount of investment that we have that is going to benefit or directly benefit populations in areas of low or very low opportunity, investments in the transit system outside of those areas were sort of a head scratcher for us. If we're looking at improving bus stops on Washtenaw Avenue, even in the city of Ann Arbor, if we're taking your sort of example and saying there are residents in either Ypsilanti or 48197, 48198 who are relying on transportation between Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti along that route, is that something that is a benefit? Or is it something that is an Ann Arbor benefit, or just something that the ride is a benefit for? And there's a little more explanation of that in the analysis that I'll send with a follow-up in our memos, because there's some things that we just don't specifically attach to being invested in an area of lower or very low opportunity or elsewhere, but just sort of benefits the community. So it's new, and we still struggle with defining with the measure and defining the benefit, because we know that, again, just a couple $1 million here and there is not going to have a obvious impact on the outcomes of the opportunity index in the short term, especially since transportation is just one component of that, and job access and transit access is the most important component of that.
Okay, thank you. And I guess the other thing that I thought about is including bringing rural areas into the city. I knew someone that lived in Chelsea and depended on the ride to bring her into town, into Washtenaw County, or into the city of Ann Arbor.
And I think it's, again, a great example of all the local communities working together beyond just our borders, understanding what the priorities are for individual local agencies, but recognizing that people traverse and commute between these communities. And so to not get so stuck up in our own fiefdoms, but focus more on how we can work together to build a system, that is the goal. That's the conversation that we're trying to have.
Thank you.
And so each of these, and I'll try to move forward because I'm taking way longer than I expected. Each of these goals in our long range plan has a specific measure that's attached to it or a trend. Where do we want to go moving forward? Do we want to increase this trend, with safety? We want to decrease the number of crashes. We want to decrease the number of fatal pedestrian and bicyclist crashes. So we have those trends and targets that we do. And we try to address that with this vision of how we're going to spend money. And this is where I try to completely separate this random funding source and where it's eligible and what it can be used for and what it can't be used for, and just say, these are the types of improvements we want to do. Looking back, how have we historically spent them, and what are the tweaks that we want to do that reflect the visions and the goals of this. So equity, again, there's not a dollar amount, but it's listed first because it's a priority for us to understand whether or not we're making improvements in areas that have traditionally been underserved or from previous actions have had detrimental effects. So we view that as critical, even though there's not a specific dollar amount attached to that. Pavement has become the majority of where federal funds go for, is sort of making sure that there's this balanced approach, asset management, and that we are maintaining the system and doing the best job we can with the limited dollars that we can. That hasn't always been the case. It used to be that federal projects were more, and I'll go back to a quote from Carmen Palumbo, and excuse the language, but he would call them whiz-bang big-ass projects. That was the idea of federal dollars, it was these transformational projects. And those still happen from time to time. But federal funds can be used, and it's a great use of federal funds to be taking that balanced asset management approach, because that is a great way to ensure that the dollars that we have are being used to the best of their capabilities, with some of these other priorities in mind, like safety. Safety is huge. And so that was the biggest change that we did. We looked back at projects that their primary purpose was safety, looked at how much had being spent, and we said, I think we need to increase that. So we raised this vision of how we're going to be spending dollars to invest more in projects devoted specifically to safety. And then we have bridges, which we see as a critical component, the environment and congestion, non-motorized, and transit. Transit, all the federal funds that go to the ride come through Watts. So those are part of approvals that we do as well. So the ride needs to be actively engaged in conversations with the rest of our region here in Washtenaw County for them to secure their dollars as well. But the idea here is to say, these are the policy bins. These are the types of projects that we want to do. This is about how much we want to invest in the future, regardless of where the money is coming from. And so this is really defining that balanced approach and how we want to spend the dollars. So that's the long range plan, the 20-year horizon. And I'm already over time, and Emily or anyone can tell me where my hard stop is. I can stop now and come back another time, or I can try to get through this in a few minutes. And Commissioner Green has a question.
Just a real quick one. I was wondering, does Watts get involved in RTA?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. We have been involved in a lot of discussions, from the beginning. We are active partners with the ride, who's engaged with conversations. We were at least at the table when there were discussions about what might a different RTA look like if it wasn't the entire region. So I would say that we are involved, yes, but we are there to advocate for Washtenaw County and our place in the region. And okay, I'll try to speed up here. I apologize for going over. My fear was that I'd be done in 15 minutes. That is clearly not the case.
Do you plan on going for maybe another 15 minutes tops?
Yeah, definitely. I can do that.
You're doing an awesome job. It's just, this is such a huge topic. And then what I can do is work with the board to see if there's specific areas of interest, and perhaps we can invite you back at a later date to go into more detail on specifics. But you're doing an awesome job of trying to compress a very complicated subject into a very short time frame. So thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so the Transportation Improvement Program. This is sort of where vision begins to meet reality. And we have that list of projects from the long range plan that go out 20 plus years, the goals, the vision. The Transportation Improvement Program is really where you begin to see commitments. Local agencies are putting in real dollar amounts for projects with specific limits. This is another thing that's required. It's a 4-year list of funded improvements across all those various different funding sources coming from the federal government. And in Southeast Michigan, we can change it 3 times a year. And there's 2 ways that can happen: amendments and modifications. Modifications are a tool that agencies such as Watts and SEMCOG are provided to ensure that we're not the thing that's delaying a project. So if you're looking at a project that is a reconstruction project and it was going to cost $2 million, but now it's going to cost, an extra $200,000 or something like that, something small. Minor changes in that can be sort of administered from local agency, or excuse me, from Watts, working with our local agencies, ensuring that we're not sort of taking money from one person or one local agency and giving it to another. Real small changes can happen administratively, but when it comes to a significant change, a new funding source, new money coming in, that has to be an amendment. And unfortunately, amendments take a long time. I think some people sometimes call it administrative progress, but really it just makes things more difficult and take longer. But every new law, there's more and more things that get tacked on, more and more things that have to happen by the local agency to get a funding commitment from the federal government. The amendment process takes months, unfortunately. And as I mentioned earlier, these funds have to get obligated. They have to be secured by a specific dollar amount in every given year. And so the amendments and the modifications allow us to remain somewhat flexible, but more and more we need to have a solid idea of what is going to happen going into a construction season well before that. And there's still places where that can be adjusted. And so our hands aren't tied too much, but major changes in a project that's been planned can delay it by months, by a number of months. And I mentioned here a creative financing example. I'll just provide one example, something called Advanced Construct. I mentioned we have about $5 million of urban funds each year, and I'll talk a little more about the different funding sources. But when we're going through all the local agencies, that $5 million can get eaten up really quickly. And there might be a large project. There might be a $2 million project. And we can't just, sort of a square peg round hole. We can't get that done in a given year. But there is a process that allows a local agency that has the means to essentially say, we're going to build this. We'll pay for it now. You can pay us back next year. You can pay us back in 2 years. You can pay us back over the course of the next 2 years. And that allows us to move projects forward, but to continue to secure the promise to repay from the federal government. All right, types of funding. So I classify these into 3 different types. Commissioner Fuller?
Yeah, Brian, you just said if a project is, I want to be clear, is going to take place over future years or
so
if the money gets obligated this year and rolls on into the next 2 or 3 and suddenly the pot shrinks because somebody got a commitment for the money 3 years ago. So this year's money is already gone.
If I'm understanding the question, I think it works a little bit the other way. The construction will generally happen the first year of the process, but then the payment could be drawn out by a couple of years, but that payment is still as promised as any federal funds ever can be. And so if, say, there was $1 million commitment for the following year, and then the amount for the county for all our local agencies in the county was reduced, that is something that we would have to work with as a federal aid committee, the implementing agencies, and a policy committee to make those commitments whole. Once a project is obligated, it's going to get that money. And with federal funds, even when it's in the tip, we often have things listed as being funded when we don't even have a transportation bill that will go beyond, a few months. So there's a certain amount of faith that is inherent in any federal project. The advanced construct process is just a tool that allows us to extend the period that a project gets paid back to allow the process to continue. But once something is obligated, there's the commitment to have that paid back, even if that means we have to adjust things in the future.
So you use two words that I'm hearing you use interchangeably. One is obligated and one is spent. To me, there's a difference.
So obligation is the promise of the federal government to repay. The spending for all the federal programs is going to be initially borne by the local agency. And this is just that promise to repay the local agency. That commitment for the federal government can be extended throughout multiple years through the advanced construct process. And the reason there's a number of reasons to do that, but that can allow more projects to move in a given year. There are a number of reasons that you might want to employ that. It also allows us, and this is where it really comes in handy, is these advanced construct process allows us to secure money immediately in the following year. And so if new money becomes available and there's already a commitment to repay from the feds through an obligated project, new money becomes available, boom, that money can be repaid immediately once it becomes available the next year. Does that begin to answer it?
I'll work with Cheryl to better understand.
Okay.
It is really, really easy to get hung up on the different terminology because these are different words and they actually do have very specific meanings. So again, this may be a good example, Ryan. Maybe we do the life of a project and we can sort of explain what we have to do as we walk a project through, and that might be an example. We can do at a later date. And then you can understand, we can define what does obligation mean, because that's sort of like a black box thing sometimes. And then we can certainly get into some of the details of advanced construct, because it is something that this organization has used because it's low risk, but there is potential risk associated with it. So, but there are reasons why you would do it. And so I think that those are some real good examples that we could do in the and that might make it easier to understand each of those terminology as we're going through.
Thank you.
Fair enough, Ryan?
Yes, thank you. So I did promise I'd talk about funding in this presentation. There are three, I categorize federal funds in Washtenaw County in three different ways. There are the funds that Watts and the policy committee controls. There's ones that we prioritize and influence, and there's ones that we just support, where we don't necessarily have decision-making capabilities. So the funds that we control, there's what we call urban dollars, and that's what the Urban Federal Aid Committee deals with. There are rural dollars, which is what the Rural Federal Aid Committee and those eligible agencies are dealing with. And there's special purpose funds that come in. There was the Recovery Act a number of years ago that had a large cash infusion. The Highway Improvement Program, the HIP program, there was COVID relief funds. Often when you'd hear about these large cash infusions that were coming from the federal government, those were coming to Watts when it was transportation dollars. If they're federal transportation dollars, that's where they go through. And those are the ones that we decide. Our policy committee decides where they go. Then there are the funds that we prioritize. And the great example of this is Congestion, Mitigation, Air Quality, or CMAQ funds. So those are projects that improve air quality or reduce congestion. This is by definition a regional process. And in this case, it's the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or SEMCOG, who defines it. But they sort of let us have, they allow us to build our own sandcastle on the side of the sandbox, sort of. SEMCOG's process requires 50% of CMAQ funds that come into the region to go to transit, 50% to go to roads. They also allow the top project as it scores and their scoring criteria from each county to receive funding for transit and non-transit. But because we have our own decision-making body with the Watts Policy Committee and not just a federal aid committee that ensures a list of projects can be delivered, SEMCOG allows us to move forward our top priority. And we, being strategic and trying to maximize the amount of funds that come into Washtenaw County, will often put forth our most costly project to ensure that we get the biggest, to ensure that the most money can be spent as possible and we're securing the most dollars. So you may have the case where you have a multi-million-dollar roundabout that a couple agencies could be working together on, and another local agency that was looking to purchase a street sweeper or something like that. You have multi-million-dollar project and maybe one that cost a couple $100,000. And as a policy committee, we would say, we think we should go forward with this $2 million. This other project is valuable. Maybe there's a different way we can fund that. And so that's a privilege that we are afforded because of the nature of our relationship with SEMCOG and our standalone status as an urban area and a transportation study. Like 3 minutes, I think. You may have heard of the TAP program, the Transportation Alternatives Program. That is something we don't decide, but it's something that we support and will work with local communities to organize their application. Similar with safety and bridge funding, we are there to support, but we're not there to decide. And that's not a decision that we've made. That is just how the process works with the region, the state, and the feds. I do want to talk about our prioritization. And the best example, the largest example, is our urban federal aid process. That is the largest share of the dollars that we have total control over. So we do have a points sheet, but I will be the first person to tell you, we spent a lot of time and talked to a lot of people to make our points process as good as possible. It is not perfect, and it is, I believe, impossible to have a points-based project be perfect. There will always be biases in it. And that's why we use it as the initial step. Those points reflect the goals and priorities that I listed earlier from our long-range plan, but it just provides an initial prioritization of projects that can be funded in a given year or a given tip cycle. And so that initial list of projects that could be funded is what the Federal Aid Committee will initially discuss to make sure that their needs are being met and that a program can be delivered. Once that happens, then it moves forward through the public process. There are a number of other things that we do. Again, I'd encourage you, if we get a few minutes, to go on our website. There's a lot of useful information. We do have a travel demand model, which projects congestion and travel patterns in the future based on anticipated changes in population and jobs. We have helped a couple local communities so far, the city of Chelsea and the city of Ypsilanti, with tactical urbanism projects, which is looking at doing low-cost temporary treatments to see if the residents in the community likes it and wants to make a more expensive permanent commitment. Asset management data collection is a great example of a partnership we've done with the Road Commission for nearly 20 years now. Watts and the Road Commission, along with a member of MDOT staff, have gone out to the 900 or so miles of federal aid eligible road in Washtenaw County and given it a ranking. And that's been the basis of the asset management approach. We collect non-motorized count data. Road traffic counts have been going on for a long time, but now that we deal more with funding things like trails or participating in that and looking at all modes, a simple question: how many people use that trail? And for years, I don't know, seems like a lot. It was only anecdotal information that we had. We purchased a couple counters, a couple permanent counters along the border-to-border trail and in Pittsfield Township at Lore and Textile. And we have mobile counters that we go out and we'll take counts of pedestrians and bicyclists. And then we take all that data and we put it up on a map on our website because we think it's valuable information to understand what type of use these facilities are getting. So we are just in the process of developing and approving a new transportation improvement program for 23 through 26. We had two of our staff people are leaving, which has been a huge loss, but Nick and I are excited about the prospects of the future and new employees. We're going to review our local performance measures, which are sort of those targets or trends that we have for our investment strategies in the long-range plan. And it's time for us to update our bylaws. And as part of that, I want to have what I call a membership drive, but make sure that all of our townships are aware of what we do, the importance of their voice being heard and coming and participating with this important regional discussion. I am sorry I've gone over. I enjoyed that. I appreciate the questions and look forward to more either now or at a later time.
Thank you, Ryan.
Commissioner Fuller, it does look like Matt had his hand up.
I can't see him,
Okay.
so.
Matt, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Ryan for coming. Obviously, you can tell from this presentation that the amount of questions is a very complex subject. And I just want to also point out that Watts does a great job of assisting us in administering the federal aid program that we're responsible for. It's a great partnership that I've been a part of for many years. They do an outstanding job. They are a tremendous resource for our organization and for all of Washtenaw County. So I just want to thank him and his staff. And certainly we can, if there's specific questions or specific topics about the presentation that we went, that we've talked about today, we can go down a couple of different rabbit holes with these presentations, but we can absolutely come back to any subject that the board is interested in.
Thank you, Matt. I'd like to echo what you said. Thank you, Ryan, for providing that overview. I don't think you could have spoken fast enough to have gotten through that entire subject matter without questions, and we certainly appreciate that you entertained questions throughout. I think it just underscores how important of a subject that this is and how much goes into the decision making, and that we want this to be well thought out and to reflect the priorities of our community collectively. And the local agencies that are responsible for ultimately getting those projects out the door. I can't tell you how much I think it's important that we are a part of Watts and that Watts exists. Ryan used the example of CMAX, but this happens across the board on so many levels, that we are able in Washtenaw County to make decisions that again reflect our community and our priorities. And honestly, we play together very nicely. There are certainly times, and I know Ryan on more than one occasion has told me, Cheryl, I'm tired of hearing about how the road commission is not getting enough of X, Y, and Z, because of course, anyone here is going to advocate on behalf of our agency, just like the others do within Washtenaw County. But we play nice together at the end of the day. And we do understand the fact that the city of Ypsilanti may have a big project that's coming through that's important to them, and they need to assemble that funding package. And so on a specific year, they may dominate, and that's okay, because we know that collectively in Washtenaw County, we're going to see our fair share in following years. And again, that our fair share is going to reflect the priorities and the goals and all the things that have been established through the Watts planning process. And that's important, because then when it finally funnels up to SEMCOG, which again is another great organization, but SEMCOG reflects 7 counties. And honestly, we're not going to be able to, if we're, have those types of conversations when we're sitting at the table with Oakland County and Wayne County. So Watts has really been a great forum for us. I think for the road commission, we have certainly benefited, and certainly the community of Washtenaw County. I just have to share, because I did see Bob Polins last night, who was managing director of this organization years ago, and also director of UATS. And actually the first time I met Bob was when he was director of UATS. And I will never forget 20 plus years coming back from a UATS meeting and saying, Bob, I lost $1 million. And he just laughed at me and said, Cheryl, don't worry about it. Because he knew, again, collectively we would sit together and we would work it out. And the project and the funding and everything would be fair for all of us within Washtenaw County. So thank you, Ryan, for that. I hate to say it, but I think that we will ask you to come back again in the future, and we will try to make it a little bit more topic specific so we can better understand terminology like obligation and what some of these things exactly are and what they mean for us. Any other questions? All right.
All right, so we are at the 10:14 mark, scheduled for a break in here. If we could just take a 10-minute break and come back here at 25 after and go back into the neighborhood traffic management program. Will that work, Cheryl?
Yes, that will.
Okay, okay. So we're gonna take a break. Emily, tell us what we do here.
Okay, I'm going to pause the recording, and then if you guys just want to leave you can leave your computers as they are and just go to your break and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are now going to hear from our one and only Brent Slack on the neighborhood traffic management program. Cheryl, anything? Lead in here?
No introduction needed. Brent Slack, Assistant Director of Engineering. Next month at the working session, we'll be covering sort of a broad variety of traffic and safety topics. But based on some conversations we're having with Commissioner McCollum, we thought that it might be helpful to break out the neighborhood traffic management program and do a separate presentation on that. This is something that Brent and his staff has been working on. For instance, most recently, they did a presentation to Superior Township because there were some questions as to how that program works. And some of the officials in Superior Township were interested in that. So Brent basically did this presentation for their benefit a few months ago. And it is something that is unique. We work very closely with communities. Obviously, residential issues, particularly things like speeding within residential areas, is a very common complaint for us. And so this has been a program that we've put together to try to address those needs and those concerns in a manner that makes the most sense for the Road Commission and for the townships that we're working in. So I'd be more than happy to hand this over to Brent.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for allowing me this time to go through our neighborhood traffic management program. And we couldn't do this presentation if there wasn't some thanks to Cheryl. So Cheryl was probably the pioneer that brought this to the Washtenaw County Road Commission back in, what, 1997, 98, and got this through agreements with operations and our board. So a big thanks needs to go to her for coming up with methods for our communities to try and implement some traffic calming. So we have the neighborhood traffic management program, and like I just touched on some of our history. This was developed in 1998. Then in 2011, we did refine the process a little bit, and I'll kind of go through some of that. Oh, I'm going to have to share my screen here. There we go. Can everyone see that? Oh,
Not yet.
not yet. There we go.
There you go.
Got it.
Click
All
send.
right. Okay. So again, thank you for giving me this time. I'm in presenter mode, so I'm going to have to, so bear with me. Okay. All right. So you should be seeing the agenda that we have for our NTMP, our Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. So I'll go through some goals that we've set up through this program, our procedure, the funding, how these projects get funded, and then the criteria, and then we have some tools, the tools that we use, and we'll kind of touch on a lot of communities use the speed humps, but we do have more tools in our toolbox for them to utilize if they desire. So the goals of our program, we want to create and evaluate requests in an equitable and consistent manner, develop measures for residential areas. These only qualify for subdivision roadways that are 25 miles an hour. And then review the effectiveness of these calming measures over time. So those are our goals that were developed through our program, and those date back to when we initially created this program. So the procedure that we follow follows these 7 steps. So the community will, well, first they make contact with us, either through, now we have the C-Click fix, but before they would contact us through a letter or a phone call, and then we would provide them with documentation for an initial petition, what our program is, and then they would submit that. That initial petition is 7 freeholders or 7 community members to get the process started, where we will go out and evaluate the community, the subdivision. And that's step 2, where we go out and we collect an engineering study, and we look at speed, volume, and we'll kind of go through that, what those steps are. Then we, if they do qualify, we prepare a preliminary design, and then we go and lay that out in the community, working with that community, and we have them submit another petition that they agree with what we've designed. And then funding is identified either through the community or the township. We have some great township partners that have stepped forward and realized that some communities need these measures put in, and they will fund those. Then we finalize the design and we put that out for bid for construction. So funding, there's 3 options that we allow, and I guess let me highlight that the Road Commission does not fund these. Although we do not provide construction dollars, we do provide our time and effort to come up with a design, to evaluate the community, and work with that community, whether that's through public meetings or what have you, for them to understand our process. But the 3 options, and number 1 is probably the one that's mostly used, and that's through the township. The townships have funded these. They've either done that through their general fund or through, if they have some transportation millage, they'll fund traffic calming. Pittsfield Township's a most recent one, I'd say the last 5 years. They created where they have so much money allocated for traffic calming. Then the community, we do have some communities that have funded traffic calming measures. Polo Fields would be an example of that, where they've qualified and they've funded their own improvements. And then there's also a combination of township or community neighborhood funding option. So the criteria to qualify, and what we initially look at when we're contacted, is the roadway classification. It needs to be classified, and I'll kind of touch on what these are. So these are the criteria that we look at: neighborhood support, and then we have our plane assignment, which is our criteria when we evaluate the roadways. So the classification, it needs to be classified as a local residential subdivision street, and it has to have a prima facie speed of 25 miles an hour. And that's what we look at. We do get some requests for other types of roadways, but based on our policy, it needs to be a local road, a local subdivision road. So neighborhood support, and I kind of touched on this previously. We need an initial petition, a minimum of 7 residents from different households to get the process started. Then the installation petition, which this is a recent change for us, we need a minimum of 51% of the property owners who could be impacted. So when I say who could be impacted, there might be a cul-de-sac road that's off of the roadway we're evaluating, and their only way in and out of the subdivision is over the roadway that will be have traffic calming devices installed. We've interpreted that as then they would need to have a vote within this petition. So, and like I said, we recently changed this. This used to be a 75%, and we had that for, gosh, since this policy's been in place. But over time, we've evaluated that, and the SAD process only requires 51%. And we're like, and we had some communities that questioned this, and we had some that struggled to get to that 75%, even though And a lot of that wasn't due to people not wanting the devices. It was due to rentals or property owners living out of state, and it was a challenge to get to that 75%. So we agreed, and we looked at this number hard, and we said, you know, 51, that's what they use for street lighting or for other SID type processes. That should be good enough for us. So we changed that recently to 51. The factors that we look at when we evaluate a local subdivision road, we look at the 85th percentile speed. That's what 85% of the people are driving at or below, the speed they're driving at or below. And that's used also for determining establishing speed limits on roadways. But that's what we used for one of our criteria. Cut through traffic. That's always a big question on, well, what is cut through traffic? And so in a normal single family home subdivision, a single family home can generate 10 trips per day. So we look at a roadway and we keep that in mind as we're evaluating a street. All right, what's the expectation for the number of vehicles on this roadway? And that's where the ADT, the average daily traffic, comes into play. We also look at 3-year crash history within the community or the roadway that we're evaluating, the proximity to schools, other major pedestrian generators. Those are the some type of shopping center or what have you that people are walking to. That we keep that in mind. And then the existence of sidewalks. We do have a lot of communities that don't have sidewalks, and so they're walking in the road, and we wanted to take that into consideration. So this slide, and there'll be a couple other ones. This is just 2 of the of our criteria, and this is where it breaks down into the points. So we need 10 points to qualify for traffic calming. So, and again, going back into history, when we first developed our traffic calming program, we only had these first 2 criteria. We had the 85th percentile speed, and that was you qualified if you were driving 35 miles an hour or 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, and you had a cut through traffic of greater than, I think it was 70%. So we wanted to try to keep that in consideration when we looked at our criteria. So you need 10 points to qualify, and if you have a speed limit of 10 miles an hour or greater than the current posted speed, you automatically qualify. And so we wanted to take that into account, which dates back to our original policy. Here's a couple other our average daily traffic. We wanted to give a point system for that volume of traffic. And we do have communities that have over 1,200 vehicles per day. And so we wanted to assign a point system on a graduated level like you see here. And then crash history, we looked at crash history, and that's yes or no, and we assign a point for that. Then looking at pedestrian generators, schools, libraries, shopping centers. Again, we wanted to take those into account, along with whether or not there were sidewalks included. So looking at all this different criteria, which, you know, I got to give kudos to Elena Yadikina, who she currently runs this program. She and I worked together to develop these 7 criteria, which I believe really helps encompass our current policy and gives light to those areas. You know, I'll just kind of back up. You know, before, in order to qualify, you needed 35 miles an hour or greater. Well, there was no other, you didn't have any points or anything that was associated if they were driving less. We'd always get the comment, Well, they're driving, 32 miles an hour, and that's 7 miles an hour over the speed limit. And yes, and so having these point systems apply, I believe, do help, and it helps recognize those concerns. So, like I said earlier, we need 10 points to move forward. So we'll, when we get these requests, we evaluate it, and then we apply it, and we provide this information to the person petitioning. So like Ryan had in his presentation on the 3 C's, we have the 3 E's and that we reference a lot, and I bring this up in a lot of other presentations that I do, and that's education, enforcement, and engineering. Us at the Road Commission, we look at that engineering component, and we also help with the education side of things. But you need all of these in order to have a successful community. So if there's not enforcement or some type of the local police departments responding to concerns, and then educating that community, a great majority of the issues that we see within communities are their own residents. And so we have literature that we can help with. We have some brochures, and we'll have community meetings. There's also the dynamic speed signs. You've probably seen those in certain communities. We don't own those, but the sheriff's department does, and some communities do. And that helps educate that community on how fast they're actually driving. Sometimes when you're driving through a community, I mean, you have pedestrians out, so you may not be just focused directly on your speedometer. And sometimes we don't want you to be. We want you to drive comfortable. Well, that comfortable speed may be, 7 miles an hour over the speed limit. So we want to educate the community. And then we also, if they qualify for some type of calming measures, we have our engineering solutions. And I can go through some of those now. I don't know if there's any questions so far. I haven't seen any. But going through our toolbox, so like I said, speed humps are ones that most communities use, and there's a reason for that, and that's because we've developed quite the process for installation, and an easy process, and they're the most affordable. So that's, and I'll kind of go through each one of these and some of the pros and cons of each one. So speed humps here. And I guess before I get started, so to calm traffic within a community, you mainly, you need to either move that vehicle vertically up and down or horizontally. And, or you need to make them feel uncomfortable in some manner that they slow the speed down. That could be where you're choking those lanes. So a speed hump moves that vehicle vertically. Our speed humps are 14 foot long by 3 inches tall. And that's to maintain that 25 miles an hour, but they're still uncomfortable. And we've worked hard with, initially with because we have underbody plows. So we wanted to make sure that we had something out there that was conducive to that. So again, here's a couple pictures of some of those humps. These here are in HMA or asphalt. I believe the one on the right is concrete, and that's our current standard, is to use a concrete speed hump. So the advantage of these, it reduces the speed, and it may reduce cut through traffic. What we found, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Rod's got a question. Yeah, Rod, go ahead.
Thank you, Brent. You mentioned that the speed humps was the most affordable mechanism used. What's the average cost?
We're seeing costs for the actual construction of that hump. It's right around $5,000 per hump. That's for the construction dollars, and then when you roll in the sign and the pavement marking, you're right around $5,500 to $6,000.
Okay, and also, just one other question. You mentioned that the initial petition was typically limited to homeowners. That means no renters?
Correct. It says freeholders, so they would have to be a registered voter within the community. We don't do a great job of vetting that out. We mainly look at, oh yeah, okay, they're a property owner within the community. But when we go to the installation petition, that's where we send those to the township, and they look at those and make sure that they match up with their tax records.
I see. Thank you.
But Brent, you said two different things there.
Yeah.
You used the word voter and you used the word property owner.
Right, there's a big difference.
That's right. So the initial petition is just a freeholder, so it can be any voter within the township. I believe that's the definition of a freeholder. But when we get to the installation petition, then that's for the affected people, the residents that are affected within the neighborhood. And that's where we're actually looking at property owners and those that live along that roadway.
Okay, so renters are not considered.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, you're welcome. So again, the advantages of speed humps, they're relatively low in cost, but there are some disadvantages. They may, and we've seen this, they may cause traffic to shift to another parallel road, and most likely will be on that road the subsequent year to install speed humps or some type of traffic calming device on those. It can affect emergency vehicle response time. It can cause some contents within your vehicle to move around, and it may increase some noise. Then we have narrowing lanes. We have done this on, I believe, one road within Ypsilanti Township where we painted a white line to kind of narrow the roadway. And again, it's kind of squeezing those cars together, which then forces them to slow down. The advantage of this can be put in quickly. It can be easily modified. It may decrease vehicle speed by providing guidance to drivers. The disadvantages, it requires routine maintenance, which most of these all do. It's also sometimes it can be perceived as not an improvement, just having paint on the roadway, and it could increase the cost to resurface the road in the future. Chokers, again, this is where you're narrowing that lane, you're making that vehicle move horizontally, and then we got some advantages and disadvantages of this. Which again, I can supply this, or maybe Emily can supply it to the board. You guys can look through. We do have some advantages and disadvantages of these.
It's been provided, Brent.
Oh, it has, great. Okay. Then we have a 2-lane single or angled slow point. This is again where you're moving that vehicle horizontally. This can reduce speeds. It can cause some issues with our snow plowing, and which doesn't look like we have on here. But it doesn't. It shouldn't impact the emergency vehicles too much or public transit. But putting those devices within the roadway could cause some issues. Traffic circle. We do have one of these over off of Carpenter Road on Clover Lane. And it's there's some advantages. Again, you're putting a device within the roadway that can slow vehicles down. Commissioner McCollum, I see you have a question.
Yes, Brent, it seems like, most of the, besides the speed, humps, that most of the calming devices are really for larger roads, not residential per se. Am I right, or?
No, I mean, every one of these tools could be put in place within a community. Again, then it comes down to those costs. You know, when you're looking at putting in place a traffic circle, that could have impacts on those corner lots. It's definitely doable. It just would take more funding to put those in place. So I don't, speed humps is easy, and and it's affordable. So that's why it's the ones that, you know, communities gravitate towards, and it can be put in, you know, typically within a season, where some of these other maybe require a little more planning.
Yeah, anytime you're moving the curve, it's gonna get expensive, because not only do you have the curve, you have to make sure that your drainage is gonna work. So potentially you're having to move catch basins, and you're having to adjust your storm sewer system, which might not be readily apparent, but can be very expensive to adjust as well. So things like a choker, or things like the angle points where you're bringing the curve out, those just get very costly very fast.
Thank you.
Then we have Gateway. I'm sorry. Oh, Rod, you got a question?
Commissioner Green?
Yes, I just one more quick question. I'm assuming as well, the speed bumps are also easy to remove, correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the.
Speed bumps are also easy to remove, correct?
Yeah. I mean, we've replaced speed humps in the past. So yeah, I mean, you're just removing pavement, and so yeah, I guess it could be easy to remove. A lot of times what we've seen is our HMA locations that we've had installed with asphalt. A lot of times over time, those begin to break down, and we've replaced those with a concrete speed hump. And so in that case, it was easy to just go in and remove the old material and put in a new one. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Commissioner Yamas has a question, Brent.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner.
I see that you have speed humps and speed bumps, and I've been over both of them. Speed bumps are very uncomfortable. Do we still use speed bumps? And I've seen temporary speed bumps put in place, made out of, I don't know, a rubber or something.
Yeah, we don't have any speed bumps within the public roadway system. We've gone to a hump, even though our signs do say speed bump ahead. That's just because we were trying to come up with language that a driver would understand. But the reason we have the hump is for our maintenance purposes and to maintain 25 miles an hour. So legally you can drive 25 miles an hour on a roadway, and we wanted a hump that you could maintain that. And these were researched through the Institute of Transportation Engineers. They had recommendations on the design of these humps. And so that's why we put in place the design that we have, where they're really long, and they have only a 3-inch height. A speed bump, like you mentioned, it definitely will make vehicles slow down and almost come to a stop. But with that, you're causing other issues with vehicles taking them at different speeds, and for our maintenance, specifically our snow plows, speed bump would be really hard on our equipment, if not damaging. So having a hump really helps with our equipment.
Same with emergency response. The
Oh.
speed- Even if it's slightly, I mean, like Brent said, they're still designed to travel 25 miles an hour, so, so a fire truck or an ambulance can still traverse at least a reasonable speed. If we put a bump in, then those vehicles would have to almost come to a complete stop, and then that obviously has a much more adverse impact on the emergency response. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Cheryl. So when we have a Gateway Pedestrian Refuge Island, we actually have some refuge islands on some of our primary roads that townships have put in where we have a 5-lane roadway, but that can be a treatment as you enter into a subdivision. Bulb outs, we have some communities that have parking, so you could eat up that parking and kind of bulb out, makes that pedestrian crossing shorter to get across the roadway and provide that calming through that intersection. So that is an option that we have. But again, you're moving that curb line, so when you're touching that curb and messing with that drainage, that can get expensive, and it's one reason why these I don't know if we have any of these within our county, but they are within our toolbox, and there are some pros and cons to having them. Raised intersection is another example of a tool that we have. Path closures, we haven't put any type of closures within our traffic calming program. Again, this could force roadways or force vehicles onto other roadways and cause that internal transportation, internal routes that the vehicles are taking could really change that. So again, there's some advantages, disadvantages. But we also have a full closure, a cul-de-sac. Those could be an option if it was ever we came across the location that this would make sense. We really discourage any, I know we've had communities say, oh, I just want to close it off so nobody can come through. Well, like we have in our advantages and disadvantages, we like to have our communities interconnected. That way, if you're traveling to a neighbor's house or the school bus is moving within the community to pick up school children, they're staying within that community and they're having to come out onto that primary road or major roadway to get back into the community. So to have a cul-de-sac would be, we would really have to evaluate if something would qualify for this. So with that, that was kind of a brief discussion on our neighborhood transportation management program. We do have communities submit requests within our WCRC Fix It, or they can contact myself or Elena, and we can update them on what our process is and provide them with the necessary documents. So with that, if there's any other questions, see Commissioner McCollum, you have a question?
I just want to say, Brent, thank you for this PowerPoint and for also giving information about it before to give education to the community. It's really helped explain how the system works and why certain things, why the point system is the way it is. So I just want to thank you for your help.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I believe we are the only road commission within the state that offers a traffic calming program. But we wanted a method that would help our communities where they were seeing issues.
Any other questions? I think we're good. Cheryl?
Okay, well, thank you, Brent, very much appreciate that. As you said, we wanted a program to address the residential concerns. That certainly is something that we frequently hear from communities about, is speeding. And this gives sort of an overall program to be able to address those. And because we have to work, we are working so closely with our townships, it also gives sort of an independent way of assessing, like, where are there truly problems and where is their perception. And we know that the townships also have fiscal constraints. And so if they're going to have to prioritize, it'd be really easy to just say, oh, someone complained here, put speed humps over here. But instead, this allows them, to sort of take a step back. Again, as Brent said, we look at the 3 E's, we're all in this together. So let's talk about a whole, varied approach to this. And then if we need to put some form of a physical improvement out there, this gives a nice tool for evaluating where it truly makes sense to put those in. So we believe that it's been a successful program and we're proud of it. And I'm very thankful to Brent and to Elena. They do a nice job of going out and meeting with townships and meeting with communities to explain the program and how it works.
All right, I think we're to a point, if there are no questions or further remarks to bring forward, I would entertain a motion to adjourn this working session.
So.
Second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor, Erin, if you would please call the roll.
Commissioner Gloria Yamas,
Yes.
Commissioner Joanne McCullum,
Yes.
Commissioner Rod Green,
Yes.
Commissioner Doug Fuller,
Aye.
and Commissioner Barb Fuller.
Yes. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.